Welcome back as we continue through the book of Numbers. And in this book, we've begun this second section in the book of Numbers. The first generation fails. So chapters 11 through 25. What's going to happen? Rebellion, rebellion, rebellion. That's what we're going to see. We've already seen several of them. We already looked at all those last time. You can look at the last video for that. But we've already seen, actually all the way to there, we've seen all these ways that they've rebelled. How the nation has rebelled, how his family, Moses' family rebelled against him, and they were also leaders. The spies rebelled. They also brought the nation in again, rebelling. The people who had joined in, who weren't Israelites but joined them in the Exodus, they rebelled. Rebellion, 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 rebellion. That's what we've seen so far. And then we still got all this rest to go, but we're not there yet because we have chapter 15. Now, chapter 15, what's going on here? We see something that looks a lot more like something we saw in Leviticus. In fact, chapter 15 ends in verse 41 saying, I am Yahweh your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt to be your God. I am Yahweh your God, that's a way that a lot of sections in Leviticus end. And this chapter 15, it starts talking about sacrifices. Where have we seen that before? Go look at Leviticus, chapters 1 through 7 especially. We see sacrifices. And I can link that below, those videos on the sacrifices. There's a number of them, chapter after chapter on sacrifices. So why do we have that here? People who like to try to take the Bible apart and pretend like, oh, well, I don't think it happened this way. I don't think it happened that way. I think it's just kind of all jumbled together. There's not rhyme or reason to it. They'll look at this and say, well, we have all these like rebellion, right? And then we have more rebellion later, starting at chapter 16, rebellion again. Then 15, we just have this kind of inserted in there, and it's just this hodgepodge. First of all, that doesn't mean just because you don't understand it that it doesn't have a reason. And it's not like you're the first person to ever be able to realize if something doesn't fit in a certain flow. But here, it's actually quite simple. What's going on is it's a response. It's a response to the rebellion. Because what's happened? Last time we talked about how we ended with talking about how Jesus is the answer, right? Jesus is the one that, just like the Israelites back then, they needed mercy. And we today, we need mercy. We're rebels the same. And then, at that time, how did they know about Jesus? What did they know? They knew it through these signs, through these symbols, through these rituals that would point them to Jesus. So you have these laws about sacrifices. This is reminding them of how there's able to be mercy, because you have so much rebellion already. And God's been so merciful not to just wipe them out already. Moses intercedes, but why is he able to intercede? It's because you have Jesus coming. And these sacrifices now remind them, hey, there's got to be a way to have mercy, because what you're doing does not deserve this. What you're doing does not deserve mercy. So you have to have this remembrance of one coming to save them. So when we look at these sacrifices, there is a lot of similarity with what we've already seen. There's also, though, it has another purpose beyond just being a response to what's happened before and saying there's a way for the mercy to happen, and it's through this that you will be saved. The beginning of 15 says this: Yahweh spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the people of Israel and say to them, when you come into the land you are to inhabit, which I'm giving you, and you offer to Yahweh from the herd or from the flock a food offering or a burnt offering, and it goes on, talks about these offerings. So in Leviticus, we didn't see it start out exactly that way. Now it's saying once you get into the land. So these are rules. It's kind of changing some stuff. It's not disagreeing with what we saw earlier, but it's adding to it these food offerings. You're going to have also drink offerings. And these certain grain offerings got to go with the other offerings, and this. So he's giving more details of things that will happen. Only in this case, it's once they get into the land that they're not in yet. So it's not something that applies to them right now in that way. So it's also not only responding to what just happened and reminding them about the sacrifices and their need for a sacrifice, their need for judgment to go on something or someone else rather than themselves, but it's also, remember what's the point of Numbers? What are we talking about? Preparing for the promised place. They're preparing, and this is part of preparing. This is giving them more instructions that specifically address when you get to the promised place. So as we look at these, what do we see that's different here? What can we learn from this? So we see things that are similar or even exactly the same, but we notice, as I just mentioned, that these apply once they get to the land. We also see, and this is in a number of places throughout the Bible, that the laws apply the same for the native and the foreigner. So there are some ways in which, if you're part of the nation of Israel, God's people, or if you're a foreigner, there's kind of things that apply differently, but there's so much that applies the same. So that's something to notice, that a lot of this stuff, it looks the same regardless of who you are. And then we have something on the Sabbath. Now, the Sabbath is something we're going to really specifically address once we get to Deuteronomy 5 and go over the Ten Commandments. So we can talk more about the Sabbath stuff when we get there. But we do see that there is an issue with the Sabbath where this person is doing something he was told not to do. And actually earlier on, we already saw earlier in the Bible where it said, don't start a fire and essentially, don't be making your food on the Sabbath in this case. And he's planning on doing that. So, and we have here, why is this narrative in here when we're in this little legal section, you could say, this thing that's about rules? Well, giving an example, because we've just had, here's what you do if someone sins unintentionally, and then this is if someone sins intentionally, it says with a high hand. So it's two different situations. So chapter 15, verse 22, but if you sin unintentionally, and then it tells you all about that, right? But then you move on, and it says in verse 30, but the person who does anything with a high hand, whether he is a native or sojourner, reviles Yahweh, and that person shall be cut off from among his people. And we have a specific example. Someone does something in that manner, and then we see the results of that. And that person knew better, decided he was going to do his own thing, and he was judged for it. And that's what we all deserve. We all deserve to be judged. And here, notice this guy didn't even get to give a sacrifice and just be like, cool, right? So this is a way we see a need for something better than the sacrifices they had there. The sacrifices they had there, they pointed forward to Jesus, but they couldn't do what he can do. With him, there's no sin that's not forgivable, right? We can talk about the unforgivable sin when we get to the New Testament. No matter what we've done, you have Peter. He knew exactly what he's doing. There was no mistake in there, right? He denied Jesus, and he's still forgiven. And so here we see that they need something more, and what they need is Jesus. Now, when we're looking at the stoning, what's up with stoning? Why are people stoned? Why is this the mode of execution? This was the way that the Israelites were commanded to do things, and there's a few reasons why. When everyone is doing this together, this is not some kind of behind the curtain, no one sees it thing. Everyone needs to see this is an example to everyone else. Like, this is the judgment. The judgment it's a punishment on the person for the evil they have done. But it also, as people see what happens to that person, that can keep other people from doing the same thing. Other people that are tempted to go and do that evil as well, they say, well, yeah, but I know what happens. I don't want that. And so hopefully people will follow God genuinely, but at the very least, they can have this law that says, here's the result, and at least not break the law for that purpose. With the stoning, you also need to have the witnesses participating. And there's a reason for that. The witnesses, like Jesus said, he who has not sinned cast the first stone, kind of in line with this idea of someone starts this process, right? And everyone joins in on it. The community has to be against the evil. But the one starting is the witness. It doesn't specify that here, but we do know that from elsewhere that that's the case. That when you have this witness, that it's one thing to say, to accuse somebody of something else. And some people aren't going to care. Some people are very hardened and aren't going to care if they get to kill someone. It's awful. But some people that it doesn't bother them. But there's a lot of people who maybe they're okay with throwing someone under the bus, as it were. But if it comes down to it, and that I have to be the one to actually start the process of killing this person that I know I totally made up a story about, that's going to get to some people, and they're not going to be able to follow through with that necessarily. And so here, if you are saying you're a witness, you better be serious, because you're going to be the one that's going to have to start that process of stoning that person. So you better think twice before you're a witness to this, because that's what we have here, where these people who are witnesses, they found this man doing this and brought him to Moses and Aaron. They're going to be the ones who have to start the process. So are you sure? Are you serious? This is exactly what you saw? Because here's the ramifications for that. This person is going to die, and you're going to be the one who's going to have to start that process. So there's a few parts to the process of the stoning, and why stoning is the way that this is done. It's a communal thing. It's very important. It's a communal thing for everyone to see, for people to be a part of, and all be against the evil, and to have the witnesses kind of verify what they've already said by being the ones to initiate that. Lastly, in this chapter, we see these tassels on the garments. So these little things on their clothes. They had their clothes they were wearing. On the bottom, they're just going to have the stuff that is a reminder. It's a reminder of what they're supposed to do, what they're supposed to believe, all these sorts of things. It says, starting in verse 37, Yahweh said to Moses, "Speak to the people of Israel and tell them to make tassels on the corners of their garments throughout their generations, and to put cord of blue on the tassel of each corner. And it shall be a tassel for you to look at and remember all the commandments of Yahweh, to do them, not to follow after your own heart and your own eyes, which you are inclined to whore after. So you shall remember and do all my commandments and be holy to your God. I am Yahweh your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt to be your God. I am Yahweh your God." So, what's up with the tassels? These I think maybe the closest we can come to as far as what we would connect this with in our own society today is these little canvas signs and stuff you see around a house of someone who likes to have decorations. This is one my wife has, and so it's you have this picture, and it's a verse or a part of a verse from the Bible, and so these things. This is a small one. Some of them will be huge. Some of them will be, hanging inside the living room. Some are hanging, outside the front door. Some of them some people tattoo stuff on them. There's different these different things that are just like, here, let me stick these verses in these different places to remember. I knew some people in college that they had one that said, right at their front door, as for me and my house, we will serve Yahweh, right? And so they had that verse from quoting from what Joshua said. And so they kind of have this sort of, it's a reminder. It's, hey, do you remember this verse and that verse and these passages? Except they didn't have it written down that, oh, yeah, that chord means this and it means that. They have these things that are symbols that remind people. And so that's kind of where chapter 15 ends. We have this has been God's response. We had this rebellion, and God says, hey, the way we have mercy here in this situation, The sacrifices point us to how we have mercy. The sacrifices don't give the mercy. They point to how they have the mercy. And you do have mercy in some situations, but you also have judgment. Instead of having to be judged, how about let's just remember this before the fact, right? Remember what God said and follow what God said. So we have these tassels to remember that and follow that instead, right? And so next, though, what are we going to get? What's going to happen again? Doesn't sound like they listened too well, because here's what's going to happen again. And we'll talk about the chapters 16, 17, more rebellion, and then 18 and 19, God's response again. So we'll talk about that next time.
Thank you for watching that video. I hope that it helped you learn a little bit more about the Bible today. And if you'd like to continue to learn more about the Bible, then we have plenty of other videos on the channel. And if this has been helpful for you, then you can always let me know by subscribing to the channel. And hopefully I'll be able to continue to help you learn even more about God's Word. Thanks.